So, welcome to Arctic Game Talk. Pleasure to have you here again. My name is Johan Linder, and I'm sitting here together with my colleague, Therese Mossberg.
Hello.
And you are Communications Manager for Arctic Game Lab.
That's true.
It's great to have you here. I thought we might introduce you a bit. So you've been working quite a lot with marketing and...
marketing, communication, branding, and that sort of things.
Yeah, and you started working in Arctic Game Lab now in January.
In January, exactly. So I'm quite new in the team, in the project. It feels great. It's a great team to work with. It's a great business to be a part of. Especially now it's a growing business here up in the north. So it's great to be part of Arctic Game Lab.
Yeah, and you haven't worked in the game industry before, so that's new territory for you.
It's a new business and new experience, but I really like it.
Yeah.
It's great people, really down-to-earth people. I feel really welcome.
Good, good. Super. So we're really happy to have you here, and you're working quite a lot with all the communications, the newsletters, and everything that comes out. Great. So we're going to talk a bit about what's happening in Arctic Game Lab. And right now we're working on a digital open box. For you that were a part of the last Arctic Game Talk, we mentioned that there as well. We've done some experimenting with the open box, and the open box is really just a meeting once a week where game devs and artists and all of you that's working on your own projects just meet, throw out ideas, get feedback, get inspiration, and so on. And we're working on a digital format for that, where the whole community, all of the 5 municipalities can be a part of it. And we're trying to launch that, so it's going to be a soft launch of that, the 21st of April, that's next Tuesday, on the evening on that Tuesday. It's not going to be open for everyone. We still need to regulate it in some way to find a good model to do it, with separate rooms for different interest groups and so on. But you could send an email to michael@arcticgamelab.com if you're interested, and he'll add you to the list of participants, and then you'll be a part of it. And you'll have it in the chat as well, his email. So if you're interested, please just send him an email and you'll get more information as well. And then we also have a guest here today. That's Jacob from PTO. Hi, Jacob.
Hello.
Hey.
Pleasure to have you here.
Yes, so you're our local project leader in PTO. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Basically, I come from more of a communication side of the business. I have a degree in strategic communication from Umeå University. And then I got a job at a local agency for marketing. And after that, that sign-up ended, I ended up in the gaming industry after I did some project management for a FIFA tournament here in PTO that is yet to take place.
And how is PTO when it comes to games, and how can you help the local companies in PTO?
Well, so basically the strength of PTO at the moment is the musical side of the gaming industry. At the moment, I'm sitting in an old rehearsal room for all musicians in a university at Musikhögskolan. So that's our biggest strength, I would say. On the development side of the business, we are currently lacking. So at the moment, I'm focusing quite much on both bringing out the best of the music industry or the music game industry, and also focusing on startups in the development area as well.
Yeah, thank you. We will put up your contact information in the chat also afterwards. If you have any news or anything else you want to share with us, please email us on news@arcticgamelab.com or use our Discord channel.
Yeah.
We will also put all the links during this live session in the Discord channel and the chat.
Super. And we have a great number of game companies in the region now. It's growing quite rapidly. We just put out a survey, and we're gonna have the results soon. But the first results look really good. We have a lot of companies here and a lot of people working in the games industry. And one of those companies is Wonderword in Boden. and they just released their first game, The Cursed Painting. It's a game for Alexa, so it's for those of you that don't know Alexa, it's an intelligent speaker really, which you can interact with. And I know they put the game out on Amazon. I think we're gonna see the trailer and then we're gonna have a little talk with Henrik, one of the developers. So this is the trailer.
Alexa, open Curse Painting and choose between 3 backgrounds as you set off to lift the curse, which haunts a small farmstead village. Delve deep into the ancient ruins in this role-playing game, featuring a rich soundscape with over 2 hours of unique sound effects. Defeat foul beasts using a dynamic combat system. Level up, increase your statistics, and gear up in the town shop. Get ready for a brand new adventure, dear listener. Out now, on every Alexa-enabled device. Alexa, open Curse Painting.
So, that was the trailer for the new game, and let's have a chat with Henrik. Welcome, Henrik.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so you've been working on this game for more than a year now, or?
Yeah, I mean the sort of the months they started to blend together, but yeah, it's I would say the better part of a year, so maybe somewhere between 9 and 10 months, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Good. It's a different approach, just developing for Alexa. What's your thoughts about that?
I mean, I could spend hours here really talking about the design sort of procedure for something weird like a gaming medium with no graphics, because that's really what we do here. There are certain design aspects which you have to really take into account, like the traditional UI elements in a game. We can't afford that because we don't have graphics. It's just a speaker really. So we have to sort of communicate all the UI elements to the player with no graphics. So say stuff like health, for example. We don't show a health bar, so instead we have a sort of heartbeat subtly going on in the background if the player has taken a lot of damage and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been a challenge, but a really fun one, to be honest, because I mean, for example, we knew there are blind players out there. We all know there are blind gamers out there, but we did not know they were such a large number, and they pretty much all got in contact with us because we started developing the game not really catering to the blind players, and that kind of worked in our favor because we didn't sort of demeanor them. We didn't look down on them. We sort of just made a game for a speaker. And most of the other games out there, similar to ours, are kind of demeaning in that manner. So when it comes to damage numbers, for example, in our game, it's a role-playing game, so we roll dice and we attack monsters and stuff like that. In other games, they would sort of explain the whole variable of you attacking the monster. So you roll a 15, you add 3 amounts of agility, and that means you get a result of this and that, and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole formula, pretty much. We try to sort of make design choices that will cut down on that sort of thing. So we try and streamline the damage number in this case, and they loved it. They all loved it, and we've gotten a huge push from sort of the blind audience, which is really nice.
Sounds great. Are there any more customer reviews in right now? Do you have any feedback?
Yeah, I mean, the reviews on the Amazon skill store are pretty much growing each day, and that's great. I mean, when it boils down to it, it's actually like better than a paying customer. Just getting those couple of 5-star reviews in there, because that gives us a lot more leverage when it comes to talking to not only like Amazon, which we're partnered with, but only like future IP holders.
Sounds great. So best of luck. It sounds like you're onto something really, really interesting and big. So I hope you get good sales and that everything works out well. Are you already working on your next game, or how's development in-house?
Yeah, we're currently supporting The Cursed Painting, which was released Thursday. So we are delving into sort of DLC or expansions, if you will, for Cursed Painting, and we're going to support that for the foreseeable future. But at the same time, we're working with, as I'm sure you know, with NDAs and stuff like that. I can't really go into it, but we're working with some really big stuff that will basically, when we're able to talk about it, we're going to stand on a table and shout it out loud, because it's that goddamn exciting, to be honest.
Fantastic.
So yeah, we're working on big stuff.
Amazing work. All right.
Great to hear. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about global and national news. First of all, we have, according to a recent press release from Embracer Group, where Amplifier Game Invest is a part of, they have seen an increased interest from entrepreneurs within the gaming industry. Following the successful acquisition and closing of Saber Interactive, and in order to be able to act fast, they have done a direct issuance of raising of 1.6 billion Swedish crowns. Great to hear, and the whole press release will be in the chat afterwards if you want to read more.
That's amazing, and I mean that's also interesting for the game industry here in North. As we have Amplifier up here, it's an opportunity for all the game companies to possibly be a part of that.
Exactly. Then we also heard about a game investor session, online session for an online speed dating between investors and game companies. Called Game Investor Sessions, will be on the 22nd of April. If you want to take part of that, you can sign up in the link we will post in the chat afterwards.
Yeah, and let's talk a bit about events then. We've been talking a lot about cancelled events, and there's also a lot of events going digital. One of those is White Nights, that has released a White Nights hub. For those of you that don't know, White Nights is one of the biggest game industry events in Russia, and it gathers quite a lot of people. This digital game White Nights hub is supposed to launch the 22nd of April, and it's going to be until the 30th of April, so it's quite soon. They actually have free tickets for the first 3,000 that sign up, and currently it's a bit above 2,000 according to their webpage. So if you want to start looking into digital events, I think it might be an opportunity. We're going to post a link for that as well, where you can sign up if you want to, and just try to be a part of that digital event and do some networking without paying for hotel costs and travel and so on. We also have another digital event that's happening, and that's Pocket Gamer Digital. They just launched their first digital event last week. And according to the organizers, I heard it was more than 1,200 participants for the event, and they were really happy about it. And they're also doing another event now in June, 8 to 12. And we're looking into how we can participate in that as well. So we're actually going to have a poll where we want you to just give us your thoughts about digital events. All right, that's it. So we're off for the guest of the week, Oscar Clark.
Hello there, how you doing?
Hello. Yeah.
I honestly thought when the trailer was going off that my Alexa was going to trigger.
Fantastic. So I know you were a part of the Pocket Gamer Digital last week, actually.
I was, yeah. I actually help out with the speaker lineup. So obviously, if people are interested in, if developers, I'm particularly interested in developers speaking at the show. So if people are interested in getting involved in the second one, which will be in June, let me know. Yeah. But yeah, I was hosting the track game, Dev Tools and GMI, which is Game Maker Insights, as well as the whole day of the live ops track. So I was a busy boy last week, introducing people and hosting online sessions. It's amazing how tiring it can be sat on an online screen for most of the day.
Yeah, but and what's your initial feedback from it? Was it good? Is it can you compare it to going to a live conference?
No, it was really fantastic. It's a little odd for speakers doing it for the first time because you don't get the feedback. I mean, one of the lovely things about being a room full of 100 people, 300 people, 1,000 people, whatever it is you get this amazing kind of personal feedback. When you're sat and you're looking at your screen, the audience are silent. There may be Q&A. In fact, actually, when I start doing proper talking, if anyone wants to ask me any questions, please use the Q&A button, and I'll happily answer anything. I have no shame. I can try and talk about everything. I mean, obviously there's commercial sensitivities, but always happy to try and talk. But you know, getting people to use Q&A, it's interesting how there's a lot less fear over asking questions. But it is still the case that you have to have somebody ask a question first before you start seeing the questions rolling in. And boy, do they roll in. We had a number of speakers on, you know, really interesting topics you wouldn't necessarily have thought of being like, you know, the types that spawn lots of questions. And then just suddenly, you know, somebody asked something and then 6 more questions were asked. The whole of the time of the talk was taken up with responding to these feedback questions. But that's great.
Yeah.
That means we're actually getting people information they're interested in.
Do you think this will like change how we work? I mean, the games industry is always traveling to an event somewhere in the world.
I like that. I like traveling.
Yeah.
I like having an excuse to have people to talk to face to face. So yes, I think that the reality is that the way that we run conferences has got to change forever. I mean, in reality, I think we will. The space, I think you mentioned earlier about travel, the space for having, you know, digital experiences, digital networking is amazing. And I think that that's going to have a massive impact on, you know, those events which survive and thrive in this context. We're very lucky as an industry.
Yeah.
You know, we are digital first. We are able to do remote working. We have astounding tools which are all server connected. That is a privilege. There's a lot of industries out there that are suffering. A lot of people are on furlough who have more traditional experiences, and particularly those people who are kind of in lower, you know, like the social demographics, like retail work and various others, which aren't necessarily well paid. I think they're suffering a lot at the moment. So we've got to remember how lucky we are.
Yeah.
But when this does settle down, and it will, we will have learned as a society how to better use the technology.
Yeah.
And I suspect a lot more conferences will be a combination of physical and digital, so that you have a larger audience watching online than are attending. There is only one snag. Conference center Wi-Fi is always terrible. So, you know, it is always terrible, and it always will be terrible because they're not going to invest in the scale needed to support those venues. You know, it just won't realistically happen. And especially if there are a few of those venues, and now obviously those venues are suffering as well. But I think that is going to become something really important. So when, you know, the rise of 5G, obviously, don't blame 5G for things that aren't 5G's fault. But with the rise of 5G, we will find there's lots of opportunity and lots of performance improvements. And I think we'll find events are essentially basically a meeting point for those people who be there physically, but with a larger shadow cast with the audience that can connect online. And I think we'll see more and more events where they're blending both.
Sounds great. So, all right, off to the topic for the day. That's lessons from different game strategies. And I need to mention, first of all, that we're going to have a separate Q&A session in the end of this. So please just, if there's any thoughts you have, just hammer it in the chat or in the Q&A tool, and we'll take that afterwards. So please go ahead, Oscar.
Yeah, so I'll share my screen. I'll try and go through this reasonably quickly so people have as much time as possible to ask me things. I actually am fine if people want to ask me questions generally. So, you know, don't feel frightened if you want to ask questions as I go along. I will try to answer them, but obviously I don't want to disrupt the flow itself. So also my screen is not showing. Anyway, I'll just talk through. Normally my slide share, my speaker view will appear in front of me so I can see what I look like, which is always fun. Anyway, right, so let's get on. So I'm interested in talking about bringing games to life. That's kind of like my fundamental kind of principle. But I always think about what's going on behind the scenes, what's happening in the wider industry, and try and see if there are lessons that we can learn and apply generally. So I'm going to start off with 2 particular ways of thinking, which are quite kind of prominent in the last couple of years. Hypercasual, games as a service. And I think that's really interesting to start with, because essentially what I'm trying to get across here is that you know, it's really interesting to think not just about what the game business models are, but in general, you know, what's happening in the industry and what's happening behind the scenes, because there's layers which affect business model, there's layers that affect development strategy, there's layers which affect design. But if we think about in principle, what is a hyper-casual game if it's not about simplicity? If it's not about failing fast and iterating rapidly? It's also about, you know, understanding how to get the lowest possible cost to market. That is phenomenally powerful. It's also about realizing that there is a mass market audience for games, and often the mechanic is more important than the genre. We're so used to building games around genre as passionate game developers, but that's a legacy of our interest in games. It does not necessarily reflect the audience interest. They also tended to be outfunded. Now, right now, that could be a problem because obviously the advertising world is going to be having some interesting times right now, branded ads in particular. And I think to a certain extent, there'll be a knock-on effect, a kind of, not freezing, that's probably too strong a word, but definitely a cooling effect on ad revenue, I suspect, as a result of the current situation. So games as a service, why is that different? Well, it's because it's focusing on depth of experience and living games which don't just stop, they continue developing. And that means they're focused on retention of players, and that means maximizing the audience in terms of their long-term potential, long-term revenue. That means that they tend to need audiences that are more focused. Here, genre is important because genre is a shortcut to untapping player desires. They also have mixed monetization. Now, I think that's a real strength in the current times, because mixed monetization means that we are both getting IAP and ad funded. It also means that we're not just reliant on the ad revenue at the moment. So even if there is a cooling, as I'm suspecting there will be in ad revenue, it will still be an important part of the mix. So let's look at hyper-casual a bit. I'm going to use a particular example, which is Plank. This is some data I got out of Reflection earlier in the year. I'm a big fan of Reflection and the guys at Game Refinery. You know, they're doing some great stuff. So what I look for in the game is looking at the patterns, the difference between download and revenue. So in this particular case, you can see there's a sharp spike and then it pulls off to a long tail. There's a couple of additional spikes along the way, probably based around campaigns. Obviously, I don't know the details. I know the quality guys quite well, but you know, I don't know the details of how they manage this particular game. But it's interesting how if you look at around the sort of you know, between February and April, so the March time, there's a spike in downloads. There's also an equivalent spike on the revenue side. Now, obviously, we don't know how accurate this revenue is. It's generally taken from attribution across multiple games. So in the average, it's about right. But what I think is useful here is the curve. You see the sharp spike and long tail. That is a typical product kind of model. That's exactly what we expect. And there's also a relatively one-to-one match between downloads and revenue. There isn't much retention. That's what that means. So what does happen in the development of that? Well, we have lots of ideas. We do short builds, 2-day builds typically. We then do market testing. If it succeeds, we continue. If it fails, we kill it. And we don't worry about it. We just churn. Now, it's not quite that simple. The really successful hyper-casual teams now have a system in place to develop those ideas, and often they're using third parties to drive idea generation. For example, we know some teams are being offered a retainer for churning ideas from the publisher. That's a really interesting model for game developers who want to really focus their trade on very fast turnaround, you know, simple mechanics. But if you pass market testing, if you get the 60% plus you know, day one retention, if you get the CPI under $1, ideally under 50 cents. I heard Homer Games guys and Rollick Games guys talking about getting 20 cents per install on some products. That's an amazing, you know, level of attraction and interest. So then that would then pass, and then the focus is optimizing the cost per install, because we can present series of ads in each game, and obviously we want to optimize that. But optimizing the cost of acquisition is the core driver. So some problems with that, of course, is that failure of those ideas can hide some potential gems. Because it's just a fast pace, does it hit the KPIs or not? You kill it if it doesn't. You can miss out on a number of things. I know that Space Ape guys talked about one of their games where they had the wrong theme, and it wasn't until they changed the art style that game turned out to be successful. So you have to be a bit careful, and you have to think about your processes, how you drive inspiration and learning from your process. There's also no focus on retention, which means you're missing out on the potential of lifetime value of those players. But on positive side is rapid feedback, rapid iteration, and also a rapid process to a short-term success. So you can get feedback really quickly, you can get your studio working really quickly, you can work with a publisher really quickly. It's also about being a masterclass of A/B testing, not just in terms of the gameplay, which is also part of it, but actually in terms of your marketing mix. So knowing how to look at each country, knowing how to break down which audience segmentation, knowing how to use multiple creatives, not just multiple types of creative. So you're not just using a rewarded ad and doing lots of them. You're doing that too, but you're then also doing playable. You're also doing image-based ads, banner ad type ads. You're doing every mix possible to find the most optimum experience. What I found really interesting about that is it's almost tapping into an old school way of thinking called synergistic marketing. Now, it's a horrible phrase, but the idea of that kind of holistic marketing was to be able to look at the way that when you present multiple messages, it builds up reinforcement. And being able to show someone something and then show it to them later, as human beings, we inherently respond positively to that. Yes, we can get tired of the specific ad. That's true. We can say that we're fed up about that specific ad. But in practice, what happens is we start bearing in mind that game much more positively over time if we continue to see those ads. So realizing there's a real process, a real science behind designing and testing the most effective ways to communicate the values of your game to the user as possible. That's the best thing. It's amazing. Of course, I'm not mentioning the fact that there's a lot of bait and switch ads out there. I'm not a fan of bait and switch. I know that people do it and they do it successfully, but I think you're breaking a level of trust with the player, and that definitely wouldn't support longer term retaining games. But I can see why people in hypercasual do it. But from a design point of view, hypercasual does something else, which I think is actually more interesting. It's a fidget spinner. It's a very simple one-trick pony, which feeds ad viewing. But that's not enough. You have to provide a tease. You have to provide this sense of unfinished business that makes me want to do it again. It's really about owning failure. I have to feel like it was my failure, whatever it is, that drives me forward. Now, of course, there are many different types of hyper-casual game, and I'm talking in general terms. We'll talk about some specific kind of examples later. But what I'm trying to get across is that you have to have a motivation to keep going. And typically, there's one single interaction. So, for example, with Sky Rollers, I am sliding left and right, and that's moving my legs further apart or closer together so I can avoid obstacles or go on runs. That's a very, very simple mechanic where I, as a player, own failure. If I don't do it right, I fall over, I end my run. But it was me that did that. I could have done that better. My skill was at fault. As it happens, obviously, it's a memory game to a certain extent as well, because you're trying to remember the patterns, or you're trying to remember what you do, where you need to put your finger on the screen compared to the position of the obstacles. But it's still interesting. Plank, which we saw the curve for earlier, is a very simple interaction, but it's extensible. So, for example, I'm tapping on the screen and holding. The length of time I hold is how long the plank grows. So if I release too soon, I fall off. If I release too long, I fall off. If I get it positioned right in the middle, and I've got to visually guess that, that is a really profound sense of personal skill and ownership of that failure. I always struggle to remember the name of this other game, but in this one, you're pulling back, you see a directional curve, and then you're basically just trying to find the path. But I'm in control of that action, and I'm in control of where in the path I'm going to aim. Do I go for the hard to reach gems that will get me more points, or do I go straight to keep myself moving forward? It's not strictly speaking a hyper casual game, but I think it has hyper casual like qualities. And then we see something else. So this was an idle game from Homer Games. They've taken classic idle mechanics and just simplified the screen. There are so many opportunities for you to be able to use ads, tap on things. You are basically in exactly the same experience you would be with something like Adventure Capitalist, but obviously in this game they're maximizing ad use. The extensibility comes from the fact that we can create lots and lots of different environments and a sense of purpose and progression from creating and building. So when I come back, I feel like I'm still building the pyramid. I'm still building the Eiffel Tower. And that gives me a sense of purpose and progression and extensibility. So hopefully I've given across the idea that hypercasual itself as an idea, whether you want to do it or not, is still interesting to look at how we think about game design, how we think about owning failure, how we think about engaging with audiences, how we think about reducing costs and the delivery process. There are lots of people who wonder whether it's still healthy in 2020. Some of this data is a little old, but what's interesting is that the audiences, the teams that started the hyper-casual scene a couple of years ago aren't necessarily the same people now. We're seeing a change in audience, but we have also seen essentially a topping off of the total numbers of releases of games. There is so much hyper-casual content in there that the cost of acquisition has become prohibitive. So I want to see the data that comes out of this period and see what happens to it. There was an argument made by Eric Surfett that hyper-casual is going to eat itself in terms of cannibalization of ad revenue. That hasn't necessarily proven to be the case. Although I think Eric's argument is incredibly solid and I never want to argue against him. Eric's a really good guy, really knows his stuff when it comes to marketing and acquisition. But I think it's really interesting how the people who are surviving this process are the ones who are doubling down on their professional development of content and their processes. Hypercasual, I think, is not a question of just simple, cheap games. I think hypercasual is a business strategy where you create a portfolio of repeatable pipeline content. That portfolio, that business structure of repeatable content is the interesting part. And actually, you could even argue that, from the point of view of, design, the hypercasual game is the ultimate simplicity in game design. It is about creating one mechanic that is extensible, that captures the imagination and keeps people playing, despite the fact they're going to be shown lots of ads. The design skills required to do that are phenomenal. As Leonardo da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So we've got 5 takeaways here of, hypercasual. 1 interaction, unfinished business, extensibility, kill the game early, and less is more. So I'm going to rapidly go through games as a service in the same kind of way. So, apologies for that. I use Pokemon Go just as an example. What you see here is the initial spike of downloads, and then it flattens off. Obviously, in the case of Pokemon Go, that spike was bigger than everything else on the mobile platforms. However, it still follows the same curve, and I'm interested in curves, not necessarily the scale of them. But what I find really fascinating is that whilst it is true that they had that spike and decline, their revenue curve does not look the same. Their revenue curve has a spike, but then they have other spikes which equal or exceed it. And whether it's a relatively higher, stable, this shows a considerable level of retention and ongoing audience engagement. So what's happening in the games as a service? Well, you've obviously got market analysis, you've got design and prototyping, developing. But so your market testing happens after you do most of your development work, because you can't test a game as a service until you actually know what the service is, and that requires lots more development. So you've got to then focus your iteration and your improvements on the LTV, on the lifetime value of the game. So the issue is here, there's a lot of sunk cost in development before you can properly market test. Yes, it can improve the way you test, but generally there's a lot of sunk cost. That testing is high risk. So that means that's why we have to focus on a very real minimum viable product, because we want to keep the level of sunk cost down to a minimum. But what this does do is it allows us to look at player utility, the value for players to satisfy their wants and needs. And it also means that we can postpone features to later in development, because we can look at the way features drive long-term engagement. And games as a services are like onions. There are different levels. You have the mechanic with its start condition, challenge, resolution, and reward. You have the same principle of teasing, the feeling that I am responsible, it is my failure, and now I've got a sense of unfinished business, and then the repeat. And then beyond the core of the game, we now start adding these attributes, this extension. So it might be gameplay attributes, it might be time, score, skill, grind, choice, things that make the game feel richer and deeper and replayable. Replayable is key. We also have to provide unfinished business, a sense of purpose and progression, the economy of how the game works, and it has to balance so it keeps people driving. In fact, it's a bit like the hot dog principle. Hot dog principle is there's a reason why when you buy hot dog buns, there's 8 of them, and when you buy hot dogs, there's 6 of them. Because when I run out of hot dogs, I need more buns, and when I run out of buns, I need more hot dogs. That imbalance is not, arbitrary. It's been designed into the economic system of the world. And, having the sense of anticipation, desire, and unfinished business, again, drives the context of the game, gives us a reason to play again. And then we have the kind of further metagame elements. For me, metagame isn't just, isn't the context, it's the things which aren't the pixels. So social engagement, the lifestyle fit for the player, the mode of use, that the design, how the design works with the objects that we play with. So an Alexa will play with you differently than a phone or a PC or even a console. And then how you express your gameplay culturally. So that's the social sharing, that's the YouTubers, that's all of those experiences around it. But even then, we've got to build on with events, promotions, content releases, feature releases, all of the things that build on the game to manage the life cycle of the player. So that can grow through discovery to churning. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff because I want to make sure we can focus on timing. But this is essentially the key. We want more players doing more things more often for longer. That's what is at the heart of live ops as a service. So to simplify kind of the 5 takeaways for games as a service, where they're different is looking at simple extensible play, actually very similar to hyper-casual games in many ways. They're looking for unfinished business, again, oddly similar to hyper-casual games. But where they're different is they're looking for purpose and progression. And they're also looking for a thing we call predictable surprise. That is that moment where I know to expect this new feature, this new event, this new piece of content. I don't necessarily know its consequences or the specifics of it. And building up a sense of anticipation over time, because we've tapped into the lifestyle fit, because we've tapped into the mode of use of play, because we've tapped into the player's daily routine, and not just in the day-to-day way, but in the long-term way, that's where we can deliver predictable surprise. And then finally, we're really looking at that life cycle of the player, where we realize their needs will change over time. So even if they're starting at discovery, they're going to move through learning, where they will need different things than when they actually truly engage. And when they're truly engaged, how we identify players who are going to super engage, how we re-engage players who are about to churn, but realizing that eventually we cannot assume players will stay with our game. We have to continue delivering value to them over their entire lifetime, but they will eventually leave. So point here is that you can't just slap on a metagame on a hyper-casual game and it just works. You've got layers to think about. It's not just chuck in some long-term arbitrary leaderboard or multiplayer system and it all just works. It's not that simple. You've got to think about your game design in layers. So this also means that you've got to think about different models. Different models of game have different needs. So the hyper-casual game on the left, Robo, I think it was, compared to Golf Clash, compared to Guns and Boom, compared to a premium game like Culture Simulator, or even something as extensive as EVE Online, what we see is that the depth and complexity increases from left to right, but the potential scale of audience increases right to left. So on the left-hand side, the hyper-casual game has less barriers to access, so more players could potentially be interested. You're going to have much more niche players on the right-hand side with the complex EVE Online style gameplays, but they will be more dedicated, more interested in the long term and the depth. So realizing what game mechanic you have and where it fits on this spectrum is essential to understanding what the best business model is for you. But it's not just about the business model, as I've been saying, it's also about your development strategy and how you build a business to be able to sustain that in the long term. And monetization also has a price. So every time you have an interaction with the player that requires them to transfer, to exchange either their time through using ads or their money, real money, that's going to have a consequence. So something like an in-world ad, which has just a view in the background associated with that particular branded company, that's the least friction because it's just in the context. People don't have to go up and interact with it. The trouble is at the moment this doesn't scale, and I think particularly with branded ad revenue is going to be essentially there are quite a lot of stress because of the economy downturn that's likely to be happening. This may not be a healthy model right now, but I do think it's going to be something very interesting. Then we've got soft currency. Yes, I know soft currency is not money because I can earn it through play, but I can also buy bundles of it. But it is still my time. It is the rewards I have got. And there are lots of people out there who still feel a bit funny about spending the rewards they've gained in a game inside the experience. And also then, looking at rewards ads. Rewards ads are hugely interesting because of the value that they give for the player if positioned at the right time. They're not just about revenue itself, although they're a major part of revenue and one which players generally don't object to, particularly if their rewards are sensible. Don't just give people coins for watching an ad. They generally aren't motivated by that. Give them something which gets them past the problem they've currently got, but also something which teases them on the value if they were to buy a bundle of those things, or if they were to buy an upgrade that gives that value. So thinking about the psychology behind rewarded ads can be incredibly valuable and not necessarily too much of a barrier. But if you make it something they have to do constantly, then the game becomes only about that. In hyper-casual, that's no problem. They're going to churn anyway. But in games as a service, it becomes more of an issue. I hate interstitials. I have to be honest. I hate them. However, they are an important part, particularly in a hyper-casual game, of making sure you have a monetization opportunity. And it is the price that most players understand they have to pay to participate in your game. But I'd use them very carefully and think about their positioning and timing. You don't want to make someone watch an ad before they're going to do something they're excited about. You want them to watch the ads in the relaxed period after the intensity of play. You don't want to increase the frustration of play. You want to create a space between frustrating play moments, which is time to relax. Positioning of interstitials can go a long way to make them less frustrating, and they can go a long way to make them more acceptable to players. Non-recurable in-app purchase is an incredible value, but think about why people care about them. If I've got a price on gold, I can see a discount for buying large quantities of gold. That's fine, but I don't emotionally care about gold in the game. I care about what gold gives me in the game. So thinking about your monetization in that way will make a huge difference. And then finally, think about recurring payments. I know, strictly speaking, Fortnite type battle passes aren't necessarily recurring in the sense that they're not automatically charged for, but they are something which are focused on value in the long term, value which is better for you the more you play. That's a really powerful thing. But again, as a decision to make, it's normally quite a pricey decision, and that creates fatigue. So the value of your in-app purchase increases over time, but you have to remember that it comes at a price, and the price is the fatigue that the player has. I'll really quickly run through this. I think there is a hybrid model that Artura represents because it looks at games as layers. And I think there's an opportunity, particularly the way they create a sense of empowerment and the opportunity to experiment with every level. So even though it's a programmatically, generated, procedurally generated experience, there is a sense of control and autonomy in it. And also there is a longer term loop, which allows me to feel longer term engaged, and I can show measured progress because I can upgrade my character. They even have a battle pass. That's crazy, but it's true. These things create layers, create experiences. There is a problem with Artura in the long term, and that middle game to end game, there is a fatigue that happens for players because you can't necessarily see the value. However, as a way of thinking, I think it shows it is possible, if you think in layers, to take hyper-casual style mechanics and build service-based games out of it. That only happens when we think about design as a hypothesis, and we realize the value of game as a service, which is not just a peak and a follow-through and a long tail. It's actually a peak and a continuous engagement with the audience to build a business. So our goal is to help people with that. So we're looking to help more people do more things more often for longer. Sorry. So that's basically us and what we do. So on that note, I'll happily answer any questions. I don't know how I did with timing wise. Was that all right?
I think you did really good.
Good. Phew. It's always a bit of a rush, because I can easily get stuck in and bogged down in a lot of the elements of this, because there's so much depth in what's going on and what's possible. I noticed there's one question here from Magnus. Hey Magnus, how you doing? When it comes to ads, of course, it depends a bit on the game mechanics, etc. But in general, how often would be too often to show a rewarded ad? For example, if you only had one life, and the only way to keep playing was to watch an ad, but if you die every 10 seconds, that would be annoying. Absolutely, that'd be annoying. And I think it really is a judgment. So I generally think you don't want to be able to give someone a chance to replay more than once. And if they're going to use an ad to do that replay, a classic example of that would be, what was the game? I can't remember the game. There's a few of them that do it, but I think Sonic Dash was the first game that I think did this. So you could have effectively coins that you'd pick up that would be upright replays, and you could use one to replay, or you could use an ad one time. But what we found back in the day, so it's a long time ago, when I was still at Unity doing Unity ads, what we found is that if you can just burn through ads and avoid paying, avoid the loss condition, there is no incentive to spend money. There's no incentive to engage with the game because basically it's just an ad fest. That's okay in a hyper-casual game to an extent. I'm not a huge fan of that way of looking at it, but it is kind of okay in a hyper-casual game because the point is to get restarted quickly. But I think what's interesting is you can show somebody 20, 30 ads in a day and that not be an issue. Only if it's positioned correctly, only if the rewards aren't compromising the game experience. So it's more about game experience than necessarily a specific rule. So I typically would advise that there's a 7-minute delay before you can use an ad, say a second time to do the same thing. So for example, if I've got a power up, I can get a new power up, one new power up for watching an ad. I can't do that again for 7 minutes. If I've got a daily reward, and I'm going to I shouldn't call it daily reward, but if I've got a reward process, like a reward wheel, that I can access every 4 hours, which I think is not bad timing, I can rewatch it, but I can only watch an ad once every 24 minutes. And now, different games, it might be 10 minutes, but the key thing is that the idea of 10 minutes is that, or 24 minutes, is that I will have to play 2 or 3 sessions before I can then use the ad again. So it's really about understanding the value proposition of the ad, what they are exchanging and what they're getting for that value, and how that becomes a better experience. And there are new formats that are being experimented all the time. There's a team I'm helping out called Audio Mob who do audio-based ads. Why would you do that in a game when you've got visual stuff going on? Well, the reason is that they can still play while they're listening to the ads. So then you've got a new type of use of an ad inventory that now allows players to continue playing and continue getting value without impacting their experience. So thinking about player utility first, what the ad is exchanging for that utility, and how it's building value and anticipation for play. That's really the key. Hopefully that makes sense, Magnus. Matilda, you asked if games are like onions, is that my own reflection or established model? It's a bit of both. There are lots of designers I know who use the same principle, where there's a core mechanic, there's a context loop and a metagame. I think traditionally people have talked about the core game and the metagame, but they've mixed the terms up, so it means different things. I think it's useful to separate out the what we do from the why we do it. And there are two types of why. There are why we do it now and why we do it long term. And I found from 22 years of working in games and looking at game designs that the why long term is around the social interaction, the cultural fit, the mode of use, or the functional nature of the device, rather than what happens in the game. So it's functionally useful to think about systems, layers, processes in this way that separates from each of these layers. So, you know, I can define a mechanic pretty easily by a start condition, a challenge, resolution, and reward. We know what that means. I can draw 4 boxes in and design any game on the planet with 4 boxes. And I think if you can't do that, there's something wrong with your design, basically. But obviously, we know that games can be more than that, more than those 4 boxes. But if we're going to really get down to why they work differently, we've got to really nail what it is that we're offering people. And I think by looking at purpose and progression is one thing, looking at unfinished business is another, looking at anticipation. So why we come back, why do you play a game and have to go back and pick it up and play it again next time you're on the loo? Why is that game the one that you pick up? And there's a combination of the factors I'm talking about. I feel I'm missing out. I'm fear of missing out a major influence for buying decisions, for any actions we do. It can actually lead us the wrong way if we succumb to it too much. And we have to be careful to not manipulate people. But the fact is that they are factors that drive behavior. They encourage and reinforce behavior we want to do anyway. Don't think for 1 minute that you can manipulate players in the long term. Anything like that will kill your game and your career and everything. It's just don't do it. It's not going to be useful. What is useful is providing value to players. And so understanding why fear of missing out is a positive experience, why anticipation and desire are positive experiences, and why positive reinforcement for the player encourages them to choose your game because they build up trust and authenticity with you. That's what the heart of why I think live ops, live games as a service, is so powerful, because we're not just building a game, we're building communities of people who love the same game experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think there's going to be a change in player behavior when they start to become more mature and experienced players, that they try to like avoid ads and find more strategic games or more engaging games?
Well, I mean, I think that makes the premise that ads are bad. I think we're rewarded. We showed that ads don't have to be bad. In fact, actually, I don't use the App Store to find games anymore. I actually use rewarded ads to find games. I get a bit fed up personally when I see the same game presented to me several times, because if I haven't chosen to download that game, it's because I'm not interested in it. But I do think there's something really powerful about using it as a discovery mechanism, because I get to see what the game looks like. That's why I hate the bait and switch ads personally, although I understand why they work. Because if I see a game and I see how it plays, I want to look at it. But if you give me a bait and switch ad, so you show me an ad that's not the game that I'm going to download, As soon as I downloaded that game, it's not a game. I delete it. I'm not going to play it.
Yeah.
Because I wanted the game that I was going to play. So I think, first that's the first thing. We can't assume that ads are bad. Ads are just different experiences. Secondly, it's going to be different for each type of experience we play, and the design of the experience is specific to the mode of use of the game. The way the physical device works, the way the point in my daily routine I choose to use them. Some of those games, I want to sit down for hours and just lose myself in a mystical world, and I don't want the ads to get in the way of that, and that's fine. Then I might carry on paying for some of those things, but I'm probably not going to pay up front for those things. I'm probably going to decide that I want to be part of a VIP program. I want to be part of a battle pass mechanism.
Yeah.
And I want to have an experience that is allowing me to get rich and deep. But that's just one layer of my gaming personality. I also like playing quick, fast, hyper-casual games, and I know the price of that is the same price as if I watched live TV, which is I have to watch an ad. That's the price of it. I accept that price, and sometimes I find that price worth paying.
True.
So I don't think it's about business model. I think it's about understanding player behavior, player desires, and maximizing the business model, not just in terms of the monetization, but also the way we structure how we build games, so that we can reduce our cost of acquisition. We can identify what players actually care about and deliver it, not just once, but in an ongoing way.
Super. I actually have one more question. That's for Henrik, really. Since you started talking about audio ads, is that something you've been thinking about, Henrik, for your Alexa games, to implement free-to-play and ads or so on, or using ads in your games?
It's an interesting subject, absolutely. For the kind of game we just released, the Cursed Painting title, that is more of an immersive experience, and we really don't want to break the sort of fourth wall by having an audio advertisement in that particular type of title. But there could absolutely be a more fitting sort of experience. Say we release I don't know, detective noir thing up next. We could have sort of a radio playing in the detective's car playing like advertisements. That would absolutely be something we could implement, but not currently, no. Definitely worth looking into. Absolutely.
Just an interesting reflection. Right, do we have any more questions?
Not in
currently.
The chat, no.
We'll see if it comes in more. I'm gonna just introduce next week's speaker while we're waiting, see if anything more comes in. Next week we're gonna have Peter Sundqvist. He's technical director at Turborilla, and he's gonna run an optimization workshop. It's gonna mainly focus on Unity on mobile, but it's probably gonna be interesting for all of you who wants to be or program more optimized code. It's going to focus quite a lot about increasing frame rates and how to use less battery power and so on. So it's going to be in the nitty-gritty details probably, but I think it's worthwhile to tune into. Right, do we have one more question?
No, we already answered all the questions.
Super. All right. Then I want to thank you, all the panelists. Thank you, Oscar Clark. It was a really interesting talk you had. I hope we will see you here next year at the Arctic Game Week. That would be fantastic.
Hopefully physically. I've been threatening to do it for so many years.
Yeah, well, next year we will get you here. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to have you. And please tune in next week for a talk. All right, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.